Hello and welcome to Articulate Drama, giving shape to the world of the play, getting started with set design. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia and recognise the continuing connection to land, water and culture. I'm currently on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I further acknowledge the traditional owners of the country in which you're on and pay respects to their elders past, present and future. As we share our own knowledge, teaching, learning and research practices within the university, may we also pay respect to the knowledge embedded forever within the Australian custodianship of country. Tonight's webinar is delivered in partnership with the discipline of Theatre and Performance Studies here at the University of Sydney, and it couldn't have been possible without Dr Paul Dwyer and our guest speaker Isabel Hudson, and their willingness to share their research and expertise in transforming the written world into set design. We're very excited to cover this topic as part of our Articulate Talk series, particularly as it is requested directly from high schools, and we very much appreciate all your contribution and ideas in designing this talk. We hope everyone here tonight finds it helpful for your upcoming assessments. Paul, over to you.
Hello there everyone, drama students, drama teachers and guests, friends. My name is Dr Paul Dwyer. I'm a senior lecturer in Theatre and Performance Studies at the University of Sydney, and I am joined this evening by a very special guest, Isabel Hudson, who's a professional set designer and costume designer for theatre. Isabel, I know you're a very modest person, so I'm going to just read a few of your highlights. You trained at NIDA, you've been a teacher at NIDA, you've worked for all of the major theatre companies and opera companies in Australia, Sydney Theatre Company, Melbourne Theatre Company, Belvoir Street Theatre, Hayes Theatre, Opera Australia, Pinchgut Opera. You've also worked a lot with Griffin Theatre, and I kind of want to mention Griffin Theatre because here at the University of Sydney we have a rehearsal studio space, the Rex Crampon Studio, and Griffin are often artists in residence in the studio, and that's a point of contact our students have many times enjoyed watching companies that you've been part of rehearsing and developing shows, and it's a way for students to get a kind of window onto the profession. And I've seen you there many times. I think you're going to be rehearsing there again.
Yeah, in January.
In January,
yeah.
For another Griffin show, which we might talk about later.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to go to, I think the first time we met, we were working on this show, Grace Under Pressure.
Yeah.
And this was in 2017. I was a co-writer on the show with a guy called David Williams. David was also the director of the show. You did set and costume design, I think.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to say, I actually wanted to say this very publicly. I've never said it before in public. What a brilliant design you did for this play. In brief, the play, it's a piece of verbatim theatre. So it involved transcripts of lots of interviews with people working in hospitals, nurses, doctors, hospital administrators, nursing students. And it was kind of all about the pressures that people are living under, working in that hospital workplace culture. And we kind of cut together little bits and pieces of these interviews, wove them in and out of one another. It's kind of like a spoken word oratorio almost. I felt very proud of the script, but the first time I met you in a production meeting, I thought, oh my God, what have we done to this poor designer? Because there was no thought really, like there's lots and lots of words and there was no real thought to how are you going to represent, how are you going to contain these words about a hospital? And this is what you came up with, and I was always wondering where that came from, because there's nothing specific in the play.
No. But I think it came from both you and David also initially talking about the idea of microphones. I think that even that idea of having them on stage and giving voice to a situation that we don't know very much sort of led to the overall metaphor of shining a light onto something. So that was like the initial kind of sparking idea, and I guess that sort of led to an idea of abstractly representing a either a surgical lamp or something we might recognize slightly as something as a light source in a hospital, but I think also just something that is held in tension with each other as well, and with a story that sits within it. And Yeah, I feel, there was a few ideas sort of bouncing around about that is not literally trying to be like we're set anywhere.
That's what I loved about it. I thought, I mean, obviously, yes, you can look at that image and it does resemble in an abstracted way a theatre lamp in an operating theatre, but it's not specifically that. It could also be like lifting a lid off a jar,
totally,
you know, and these are stories of people who are bottling it all up. It was also just the way that the angle at which that thing was tilted perfectly matched the angle of the rake of seats.
Yeah.
And then you did this thing that was so cool. The space on the floor, maybe I'm not sure if I can actually draw on this. The space on the floor, that is an ellipse.
Yes.
Like a flattened circle, whereas this is a perfect circle. And at the back of the space, the back edge of the circle lined up perfectly with the back edge of the ellipse. But the sides obviously don't. And I just thought that was so magnificent that it created this sense of balance, but not harmony.
Yes.
So like you said, something in tension. And the other thing I just thought was such a clever solution or a clever solve for the play was that once you've got this disc, of course, you could put lights in there. And Richard Manner, the lighting designer, I know he was so excited when he saw this and thought, we can change the mood of the play from scene to scene so quickly. And there were scenes where this could be quite a bruised kind of colour on the light or late at night or whatever.
And provide an element of transformation. I think that's really important in theatre design,
So that was it. That was my public acknowledgement for your work.
Thank you.
I think that's what good theatre design does. Like it creates a world for the play that's really tangible, you know, really, and it's not an abstract idea. It's very clear, and the words of the characters sit within that world and make sense within that world.
Yeah, it supports each other.
Yeah. So what we wanted to do, folks, for the next section is just go into a kind of a deep dive of a recent production that you did for Sydney Theatre Company, the show Constellations.
Yeah.
Nick Payne, I think is the writer. He's British, isn't he?
Yeah,
UK?
yeah, he's British.
And you won an award for this,
I did.
I believe, Sydney Theatre Critics Award for the set design.
Yeah.
And you also did costumes.
Yes, I did the costume design as well.
Okay. And that's another thing to say too. Like the focus here will be on set design, but a lot of what we're saying, the basic principles are relevant if you're doing the costume design project or a director's folio project or lighting design. There's a lot of key concepts. Looks fantastic. I think we have a trailer, a video trailer that Sydney Theatre Company put together. Will just give us a feel for the show.
Great. So this is just a production shot of the show, and in the trailer you saw some of the design. And these are some more production shots as we move through the play. It only had 2 actors in it, and also had a very unique structure. So when reading the play initially, that was the first thing that really stood out to me reading it. It kind of follows a couple and works through scenarios of their lives. And in the play, there is no stage directions about what the set looks like, or kind of where they are. We only find out those sort of ideas through the dialogue. And it's meant to be the idea that they are acting out different sort of universes different potentials of their relationship.
It's almost like 101 variations of all the possible relationships that this man and this woman could have had in parallel multiverses.
Yes, and a lot of it is also about, I guess, when I read it, about a longing. Like I initially just had a general response to the play where I was like thinking about my own life and just about all the different paths that could have been taken. I think that's like a natural thing to sometimes think about, what if, or that sliding doors moment. And so in it, I think it holds a lot of tension again. in the play of what could be and what is. And so I was really drawn to that initially. So when reading it, I thought about the structure a lot and also just what the playwright had given me. So I think that's like kind of the really important thing to first initially think about. And
one thing, just if I can, what jumps out at me straight away is like in the movement from that look to this look, we're still in the same physical playing space, but emotionally, tonally, the piece has gone somewhere completely new.
Yes, and I think, as I said before, like transformation is something I think about a lot in theatre. You know, we want to go and have an experience and see something live that changes, whether that's through the acting or the lighting or set changes or something. You know, I think the production design plays a big part in that. Yeah. And so I think that's a really important part. So in designing this piece, it's a sort of, I guess, a static container, but has a lot of different flexible looks. And that's what I focused later in the design process on. But initially, in thinking about it, even conceiving it, I just actually read about what Nick Payne had written about his own work in his own introductory, because it was such a unique structure. So just thought about that a lot and how he had come to this play even. And he wrote this as an exercise because he'd just written a play earlier with a lot of props, and so he wanted to try and do just to
strip things right back
to the two actors. And so even that sort of structure, I guess, is completely different to a different type of design where you're really thinking about the practicalities of how, you know, somebody will, you know, hold this prop and get, you know, go, you know, mapping that sort of journey. This was more about designing a concept, a mise en scène, a kind of a feeling and an atmosphere to hold quite a...
Yeah, because I mean, I've reread the play just recently, and the narrative does not take the audience on a specific journey. Yeah. It's like multiple possible narratives that these characters could have lived out.
Yes.
But emotionally, the audience has to have a journey, and your set kind of allows that to happen.
Yes.
So that's kind of the beautiful, gorgeous end point, which won you an award. So it's not just me saying that it was good. How did we get to there? Where did you start?
Well, we started actually, so this play was programmed in a particular theatre. And so we, this theatre also, I was at SDC and at Wharf 1, which has actually multiple configurations in the theatre of the seating bank. So it can be in a corner configuration, which
so
is
that would be
that one,
here. Yeah. Do you want to drive the pencil?
Yes, sorry.
So that's the corner configuration.
But this was the theatre that we were on in an end-on.
So that's an end-on staging.
Yeah, and in a kind of what we call black box theatre, which means it's, you know, got no wings. It's just contained.
There's no proscenium arch frame or anything.
No.
It's so
it's
open and end-on.
Yeah.
Audience at one end.
And we spoke
at the other.
initially about the idea of intimacy because of it being a two-person play. And it also holding so much of these small moments between a couple, you know, and these private moments that need to feel, you know, intimate to every single audience member, you know. So we also spoke about even just the sort of geography of the theatre and how to manipulate that.
Okay.
And so in this theatre, I looked at how there was a lot of space, and so how to make it feel closer to the audience, which also was part of choosing a circular thing.
But there's practical considerations too, aren't there? Because above the stage space here, like unlike, say, you know, classic kind of proscenium arch that you might use for music theatre, there's no fly tower. No. You can't have complex scenery flying in and out and so on.
And also there's two entrances and exits in the theatre, which you sort of can't really see on this, which is here and here.
Right.
And so that's also a really important thing to map out, because if you've got a play, this play doesn't have that. It had, you know, sort of a single entrance at the top of the play that we wanted to mask. But if you have a play that is got a lot of people coming and going, you need to sort of design a space for them to be in.
Yeah. So, for example, there is a version of this same space, which is the corner stage, but with what they call the vom. Which I think is short for vomitorium, which takes us back to the Roman gladiator days, entering the Colosseum from under the bed. So that comes under the seating bank. So that gives you a third entrance and exit point, which obviously for some shows would be good.
Yes. And in
Okay.
this, we also spoke about the idea of, you see even the two people on the plan, taking up what we call like the primary kind of space for sight lines. And so that's really like if you take the most extreme sight lines of each
Outer edge of
outer
the seating
edge
bank.
and try and find sort of where they intersect. And within that is like this sort of power spot where the actor feels like they can see the entire audience.
That's huge.
And they love that. Like
I do.
Yeah.
I've done it. It's great to be on stage as an actor and feel
Totally.
like you can connect.
Exactly.
And that's actually, I often overlook, people think of set design as something that's a decorative
Yes,
art,
no,
but it's
yeah.
not. It's about making the space a living, breathing, energised
Totally.
space. And as an actor, if you can connect with every body that's in the room,
Yeah.
that's huge.
Totally.
So that's one big set of givens.
Yes.
And I think for anyone who's tackling, whether it's set design, costume design,
Yes.
director's folio,
Yes.
publicity or marketing,
Yes.
you've got to think really specifically about what venue
Yeah.
would you set your hypothetical production in.
Yes.
That's one set of givens.
It's kind
What's
of the
this?
where-
Because this is another
This is
set
another
of
big-
givens.
Yeah, which is really the script. So this is just an example of a different play and just a really basic like script breakdown. And this is, I think, a really methodical and can be quite a dry process, but is so important because you have to know the play to design for it. And by that I mean more so than just reading it once. Like you have to be able to know, how many glasses of water are in, this scene that we are need, cocktail party or something, and where they're going to come from. All these little bits. And also in the script, I think any type of script, and even in constellations, there became images that kept coming up as well. So there is another kind of level of just mining the script for not just information of like who, what, when, where, how, but conceptual information of imagery that you can then tap into. So
It's kind of more than, an actor would do a lot
Yeah,
of that work, but it's a
totally.
little bit more
Yeah.
beyond that. Can you just talk us through,
Yeah.
literally through, because I can see at the top, this is for Nucleus,
Yes.
which is the show you're going to be
Yes.
rehearsing in January
Yes.
for Griffin Theatre's 2025 season. Opens mid-Feb,
Yeah.
I think. So that's a shout out for Griffin, and people should get their tickets.
Yeah.
Because the design will be great. But what are these columns? You've got characters in the scene.
Yep. And then I've got, all I'm doing is just listing the names of the characters that are in
Okay.
the scene, so I can sort of
Two
document.
characters.
Yep, how many are in there and whether they're coming and going.
Setting notes.
Yep, and so
What's
this is information that's in the script, either said, in the dialogue or in the stage directions. Of course, I tend to take stage directions with a little bit of a grain of salt because it depends on when it's written, why, and depending on what, because scripts used to be written in a very prescriptive way for a certain one set, and so often I'm looking at whether that's actually said between an actor so that they talk about the item, because then it's almost impossible to stage it without that item. So I'm trying to get down to almost the bare essentials that you would need to put on the play.
To put the play on. What are the absolute
Yes.
requirements?
And so
then
that's the
then you've
same
got
with
props,
props.
and this obviously will be too small for people to see on the screen,
Yeah.
but I'll just read it out. Glass of water, quote, cloudy.
Yes.
And I just that's like that is a fine grained level of detail, but I can imagine a world in which you kind of
Yeah.
these are one of the characters I think is a scientist,
Yes,
isn't it? And
yes.
so having a glass of water that's cloudy
Yes. Yeah.
makes us think about what's in the water
Totally,
etc.
And at the same time, then it's about, even in this, I have always another column which is just notes, and they're normally just my thoughts. And in this script, it's a bit vague on the age of the character and, in terms of the casting. And so I was trying to dissect the age of the person we have cast, and also about when they would have grown up, because often that is or when they would have been in their prime, whatever that, you're making huge assumptions here about a person, but because that would inform their style.
Yeah, what
as a
music they
character.
listened to when they were growing up,
Yeah.
if they're talking about something in the past, is it something they would be
Totally.
nostalgic about
Yeah.
or fearful
Yes.
about?
So like
or-
another character, she is an activist and grew up in the 70s. So, we've already had discussions about how that time will have a huge influence on how she presents to the world,
Yeah.
but also all those smaller little details.
Yeah. And so you call this the script breakdown.
Yeah.
You've obviously developed your particular way of
Yeah.
doing a script breakdown, but there is a handout that we'll be releasing after today's webinar,
Yeah.
which includes some suggestions about how to go about doing a script breakdown. You said it's painstaking work,
Yes.
can be a bit laborious,
Yes.
but probably good to have that as a balance between,
Definitely.
like sometimes you're doing your big conceptual dreaming,
Well, sometimes
and sometimes you're just back to the text
Yeah,
itself.
and I think sometimes when you're also got like almost, I call it design block, when you don't have an idea yet, this is a great place to start, because by going through it really methodically, I think ideas will just naturally happen, because you'll be like, oh, this scene is actually about this now I've read it again in a different context.
Maybe we should move.
Yeah.
So this is a more further level of
Yes.
breakdown, and I can see you've got now it's not just the characters, because you've got a number of actors.
Yes.
Actor 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes.
4, 3, 2, 1. And then because some of these actors are playing multiple roles.
Yes,
so we've got the characters and the actors.
So slightly, it's a different play, and I just included it because this play was quite complicated with how many were cast in it and the doubling of the roles.
Yeah.
And so for the costume design, what became quite essential is working out, what scenes people were in, and just because I'm a very visual person, it was kind of easier to do it almost by a colour.
You've colour-coded it, yeah.
And that meant I can look at each scene and know, oh, great, so in scene 4 we've got a break here. That means in that time this person can get changed. But that means eventually this became even more detailed, where we wrote down the amount of pages.
Yeah.
So I knew that they had 4 minutes or 2 minutes or 30 seconds.
But I can see, like, if I was looking at this as a director, I'd also be looking at that and going, we've had, this character on stage for 3 scenes in a row, this character on stage for 3 scenes in a row, bang, 2 new characters.
Yes.
It's a big moment.
Totally,
So
yeah.
that might influence the way you decide to block the
Totally,
scene
yeah.
and so forth. So I'm getting the sense that this kind of breakdown, super
Right.
important for set design,
Yeah.
costume design, any of those
I actually
design
learned this one from a
and
director.
analysis.
So, yeah.
There you go. There you go. And and a sense of stage traffic.
Totally.
How do you manage the choreography of the
Yes.
play?
And again, I think it's about knowing the play. Like, this is it's another level of really analysing the play and coming back to that each time. Like, you're coming back to dreaming about it, but then coming back to what's actually happening.
It's very
on the
practical,
page.
isn't
Yeah.
it? So you've got that conceptual side of your
Totally.
brain. Oh, I don't want to do the left brain, right brain thing, but you've got that conceptual work going
Totally.
on, and then you've got the kind of nuts and
Yeah.
bolts, so that it's dreaming, but it's grounded dreaming.
Something, yeah.
Can you talk to us a bit about this? I know we've had previous conversations where you've talked about the research that you do,
Yeah.
and a lot of it is researching for very specific images.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a bit about this?
And also cultivating an aesthetic, I guess, and a style. And I think that's probably the hardest thing, to make a really clear visual language, And so initially I start with just while I'm actually doing the breakdown, to give myself also a bit of a break, I, can start getting excited about ideas and getting creative. And during that process, I'm looking at lots of different image libraries, going to actual libraries, looking through books. And sometimes there's not very much of a motivated searching in terms of looking for a particular thing. I'm more just trying to be inspired by certain ideas.
But you've got some very preliminary concepts in play, and then you go to look for images, or it can work the other way
think
around?
It can work either way.
Okay.
I think also depending on what type of play you're designing.
Okay.
If you're designing something that's set in a particular period, or you want it to be very period based, whether that's costume or set, I think that sends
Might do the research first.
Yes, and
Okay.
that sends you to a specific place to look for images. And we've listed some here on this slide that I've used many times, and I think museums are really great places for that, because they'll give you first-hand, primary resources of photographs.
And they'll give you a lot of context about where these images come from. So it's,
Yes.
I notice, and again, we'll release these slides to people as part of the follow-up to the webinar, but this is not Google image search. This is really, these are the Louvre Museum, the British Museum, Museum of Modern Art, Powerhouse Museum, Victoria and Albert Museum. So they're places where art and images are curated
Yeah.
with care, and
But
and you're looking at kind of hopefully
Yeah.
the best of the best.
Totally. And also I think there's another respect thing of like you're working as an artist, so you're always looking at something that's cited. And so like
Yep.
I think there's something about also knowing the people who you're referencing.
Yep.
I think there's a very fine line between referencing and obviously copying. Like the way to I think also have respect for that is
Yeah.
to know where every image comes from.
Yeah.
And I think you can still be inspired by an idea, but I think also what it leads you to a lot of the time, which I get really inspired by, is the way artists talk about their work. Sometimes it's not actually the image itself, but it's the concept that they talk about that I find really, interesting, or like a great way to summarize something, or leads me to think about 20 billion other things. And I think that's an amazing, but I also think you can be equally inspired by, visiting like the beach or something, like, if you're setting something that's physically here, like, I did a play a few years ago at Belvoir called Winyaboga Uringa, and it was set on country in Yorta Yorta country, which is on the border of Victoria and New South Wales. And so I went and visited that space. Like I had, access to do that, but that's like, I think a really great thing as well. Like if it's an Australian play, try and find where it is. Yeah, if you can, like.
Okay. We should probably skip through some of this quickly, but
Yeah.
if I remember correctly, you were saying quite early on for constellations, you had this idea of mirrored circles,
yeah.
and this was an idea that just kind
Kept coming back
So,
Yeah.
so you then decided you really wanted to explore this idea.
Yes. And I think also just like the idea of cycles, I think this particularly, like even this imagery of like planets moving, or
That speaks to the play, doesn't
Yeah, it
it?
speaks
Because
to-
she's a cosmologist,
Yes.
theoretical cosmology,
Yes.
astrophysics, da-da-da,
Yes.
and he's a beekeeper.
He's a beekeeper.
Yeah.
Yes. And so they are very different, but then they also fit together. They have
Yeah.
intrinsic chemistry together. But
Okay.
I think even just the structure of it is about them moving. And the director also was very interested in this sort of idea of like ring blocking as well. So
Okay.
like them walking and cycling around each other.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do we get from this early kind of, they're very inspiring images? What's going on here?
This is a similar, almost, it's like exploring that idea in a slightly different way, where I was starting to think about two objects in tension with each other. And again, even that, the idea of the two characters opposing themselves and being in harmony of each other. Like, I think that, and so again, it's finding a concept in the play, but then finding a visual representation of it.
Yeah,
And that's
but these are not
is-
generic images. These are
No.
actual installation works
Installations,
by
yeah.
serious
Yes,
artists.
yeah.
Right.
And then the next one is still similarly like looking at, I think, the same idea, but just slightly looking at a different texture that represents that. And so specifically, I sort of was very set on very early this sort of idea of a platform and something suspended above it. I was like that felt...
So the surface that the actors are standing on
Yes.
was always like a little raised
Yes,
sort
a
of
raised
plinth
platform.
almost.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And on top of it, it's hard to see in the photos, is a very similar pattern to this.
Okay.
And that's also what, hid all the sheet joins, which is a very, minute detail, but it also mimicked the sort of blocking they did, and they ended up using it as markers on the stage for them to stand on, and also was a mimic of this sort of like planetary movement slightly.
Yeah, okay.
So that was a very small detail.
What are these?
These are the very sort of initial sketches that I did while looking at different images, thinking about the play and what it could look like. So, and trying to explore, I feel like maybe this one is like the closest to what it actually looked like. But these were other ideas that I was exploring while doing, like reading and researching. And, I think it's really important to keep yourself really open for a long time and then start to kind of narrow down. And that's
Right.
sort of the next
So
process.
if you latch onto a design concept too firmly, too quickly, you might end up with that sort of
Yes.
trying to push a
Yes.
square peg into a round hole kind of thing.
Yes, and sometimes you realise you can't actually track through the play and make each scene work, which is what you need to provide an answer for.
Okay. Now it looks like you've kind of getting more confident in
Yes.
the design concept, and we're getting down into details of
Yes.
texture and
Well, I also was,
construction.
once I had sort of initially set on upon an idea of this something suspended over something on the platform, I had to think, what is the suspension, and also what did it mean? And so one of the things, in this play that is quite, prevalent is this idea of the cosmos. They talk about it a lot. And so, and they reference it, and they look up at it. And so I was like, I wanted to create a non-generic representation of that. And so I started thinking also about flowers, because that's actually what the material is used. It's dried baby's breath flowers, and even it as an
that's
element.
what was used in the
Yeah.
making the set.
Yeah.
So it was a natural
It was
living.
a natural living thing.
That's amazing, because I noticed you've got on the plinth is kind of like a hard,
Yes.
black kind
Yes.
of epoxy
Yes.
resin or
Yes.
something.
Yeah.
But above that, you've got
This
this
natural-
inverted suspension. They're flowers
Totally,
that are growing
Yeah.
downwards.
Yes.
And flowers for a beekeeper, I guess flowers
Yes,
are pretty
that
important.
that was part of also the kind of little nice tidbit of that. And then I think also another thing of that, even an item that is a flower, we give flowers in celebration, and we give them in also, mourning. So I think, and in the play, that's
One of the storylines involves
Yes, her
serious
passing away.
disease, yes.
Yeah,
and
so-
death, yes.
yes,
Very serious disease.
yes.
Okay.
And so that was like a big kind of, I was trying to find a materiality that was connected in the concept.
Wow.
This artist also really inspired me, and this is an example of just the explanation of it really, stayed with me about this idea of a contemplative space that we where we can think about life and death, and that really stayed with me as an idea, and I think really influenced the design in the end, actually. And then this was like kind of a much more formed,
fuller rendering of the
sketch.
concept drawing.
But still very loose. Like, this didn't take me very long. It was just drawn as like a little
No,
sketch.
but it's so revealing of the process. And I'm just, again, for students, I would just signal, I'm sure the teachers would agree with me, anything that's remotely going in this direction, if you can get it into your logbook as a documentation of your process,
Yes.
it's going to be such a compelling story.
Yes, and I think also you don't have to be, I don't think get too bogged down in whether if something looks amazing straight away. Like I think that's what those other little sketches were for. Like they're just really quick little ones that using stick figures, using anything to try and help you convey your idea quickly is also helpful, so you can keep moving forward because it's a layered process.
Okay, but we still have to keep it practical.
Yes.
This one, I'm just a bit conscious of time.
Yes.
This is a 3D,
3D model.
software
Yep.
for modelling. So this is about sight lines, isn't it?
Yes.
It's about imagining the suspended,
Yes.
the platform and the suspended disc, viewing it from different
Yes.
spaces.
And also getting a sense of just proportion in the venue, and also because we ended up, which you sort of can't see in any of this, but masking a lot of the venue. So we brought it in to contain it, to harken back to what I was talking about earlier.
You can do this in a software application
Yep.
and or in a physical
Model
box.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you use a model box?
Yes. I think it's the best tool.
There you
and
go. Old school.
Old school.
A
Just
bit of
the
new
best.
school
And a bit of old
And a
school.
bit of old school. Okay. This talk
example.
just quickly about this one. This is kind of like an alternative
Yeah. So
take.
this was another idea I explored, and I explored this in the actual model box because I found it incredibly sort of hard to represent in 3D. And then I also think sometimes if you're looking at natural, shapes, it's really difficult to get a great shape like that in a computer. So this was using different paper and sort of creating a typography, and that was sort of exploring a different idea of what the materiality could be for the sort of hanging installation.
It's beautiful. I think this is my favourite photo, actually, from your slide deck. I love this one where you've just suspended it on a glass or
Yes,
something.
yeah.
Is that in your studio?
Yeah, that's
at
in my
home?
studio.
I think that's just so gorgeous. So, and you would do that? You would sort of
Yeah.
just make little kind of improvised mock-ups of what this set could be, and you take photos with your iPhone, and that goes straight into your
and then sometimes I put
process design process book. Yeah.
And then sometimes I put that into Photoshop, and then I add little like different textures on it or different colors if I'm trying to just determine what it looks like. And then also at the same time in this, because this had a big lighting element, I think lighting is a big complement to set design, that, you know, I'm always adding little lights myself, like just using little torches or my phone torch or my desk lamp or whatever, like, you know, really homespun things.
But that's beautiful. I can imagine a lighting designer would be thrilled to work with this.
Yeah, it was amazing, fun.
So, and then now we're kind of, you're getting very specific with the rendering.
Yes.
I know one thing I notice, and again, just for students to think about, is you've labelled everything in this image.
Yeah.
And so everything, you're very clear about everything's got a function, everything's there for a reason, for a purpose.
And I'm also working at 1:25 scale, like the whole time. So I think that's really important as well with a human figure, because I think, you know, we are designing in the end for a play, not a single installation. You know, it's always got an interaction with people. And so that geometry even is like spatial arrangement is really important.
1:25 scale.
Yeah.
Okay, which is pretty standard, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, that's for theatre. Yeah.
Okay. Different possible configurations of lighting. I'm just quite a little bit conscious of time because we want to just kind of offer a few other tips, I think. I can see, you know, you've worked through, this is option 1, option 2, option 3. That's what I love. Like by this stage, the concept is very clear. And these are different options for the treatment of the floor.
Yes, because sometimes it's hard to, I think, determine whether something looks good or not. And so there's always a visual representation of whether, and so I can make an assessment of whether it looks good. Like it's kind of quite a methodical process of going, oh yeah, this one looks better than that one.
Okay.
And then
it
this is
look
the final
beautiful.
model.
It does look gorgeous. Again, checking angles and sight lines.
And this was also being a very thorough sightline check once we got into kind of really working with the theatre company and checking all the seats. Had a great sightline.
I'm going to move through it. So obviously I can see you're also, then that's showing, which for the lighting designer would be so keen to see this. You've shown the placement on a floor plan.
Yeah.
And I think you can download this floor plan from the Sydney Theatre Company website, actually.
Yeah.
And so then the lighting designer and other creatives can work out where am I going to place my lighting instruments, where am I going to place my speakers for sound design and so forth. You also did the costumes, but we're going to breeze past the costumes. They're gorgeous. But I think we should probably just take a moment. I think maybe if we take about 5 minutes just to try and recap, and if I can just ask you a few questions, just to kind of leave that there for the moment, and just recap what I think we've discussed. So, like, that's you working at the peak of your professional powers.
Yeah.
If I'm an HSC drama student just setting out, I've got a list of about, I think it's 8 or 10 play scripts to choose from.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. How would you pick a play?
That. I think reading first at least the synopsis of what the play is about, and also trying to choose a play that you have connection to. Like, I think if you are really interested in it, or it sparks something inside you, of interest, I think that helps so much. Because
so don't do it just because you might be a play you've encountered before, like a play that you did, a Shakespeare play that you did a couple of years earlier in English.
Yeah, I would try to. In fact, I would actually maybe err upon that, away from that, because
it's pretty complex.
Yeah, and also
lots of characters.
Yeah, and also like you will be very coloured by some, a certain experience. Yeah.
I know that you said to me earlier. You said as well as getting very familiar with the play, you think from very early on you need to decide, my hypothetical production is for this particular venue.
Yes.
This particular stage, auditorium configuration.
Yes.
So in the learning resources that we'll put up on the website, there's links to a couple of theatre companies, Belvoir, Sydney Theatre Company, but most theatres it's not too hard to get hold of the technical specifications. I always say to students, try, if there's a venue that you know that or that you're interested in, try and see a show there.
Yeah.
Look at lots of images of other shows that have used that
100%,
space. First reading of the play.
Yeah.
I know some directors and designers say you should really treat that quite as a precious moment.
Yes.
Try and make quiet time
Totally.
and read it through all in one go.
Yeah.
So that you're having something like the experience an audience might have of encountering the whole thing in one go.
Yes, and I think also to add to that, it's reading a script is different to reading a book. There's not a lot of description about what they're doing really. You're just hearing the words, and so even sometimes reading it out loud is helpful.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great thing. But I think another thing that I do while doing the first read is I have a little post-it note next to me, and I just draw really quick little sketches that are like take 2 seconds. They could be just a circle, it could be, I don't know, like a flower or something, or even a person sitting on an edge of something, and I put that in the script.
So just little sparks that are just part of your first response.
Totally, yeah.
And you'll stick them on the script so you don't forget them.
Totally, or I might just
response.
underline a quote that really felt poignant to me or something.
Then I think you said it's about the script breakdown and the research or the gathering of research images.
Yes.
They tend to happen in parallel.
Yes.
Okay. How many images would you tend to gather?
Sometimes it's hundreds. I think if you're doing if not more, if you're doing a period show, and so then I think it's about then bringing that culling those ideas down.
So so you've got enough of a concept to know what kind of research images you might want to gather. Then there's a process of sorting those images.
Yes. And you might be sorting those, sometimes you might be sorting those into concepts. So maybe you have 1 or 2 or 3 ideas that are very different. And I think and I tend to do that in a PowerPoint, and so that helps me move them around quickly. Or you could print them out and just move them around. So it's almost like a mood board. I think I'm sorting them into ideas so that I can also explore them separately, but narrow in my focus.
Okay. But still, I get that sense that you like to keep 2 or 3 ideas in play for as long as possible.
Yes, yeah.
But I don't think, going back to Grace Under Pressure, I remember that production design meeting where I thought, she hasn't got a plan B.
No, I didn't.
Plan A was fantastic.
That was the idea, and I was dogged about it.
It was great. We didn't have much of a budget, but you delivered on time. Okay, look, there's so much more we could talk about, but I know we've got Joyce with us in the studio, and I think, Joyce, you've been monitoring the chat, and you might want to just read out to us some questions or comments, and I'm going to get you to answer all of these.
Okay.
So one of the students is asking, set design and costume design sound like an exciting career, but I believe it is very competitive. Do you have any recommendations how to become successful in this sector? And follow up by what can high school students do to stand out from the crowd?
Okay, so I think that's 2 questions. I'll start with, I guess it's competitive in one way in, I think, live performance, but I think Australia has a really great screen industry as well, and those skills really transfer over to film and TV. I often work in those spaces as well. Production design is very similar for both of them, just a different type of process, and a different type of budget. Just larger larger teams, larger budgets, or different times. But that's also different for all projects. I think in terms of starting off, I would say trying to find your way into a school like NIDA or WAPA or
VCA, Victorian College of the Arts.
Yep, to give you a bit more specialised training, because it is a very specific skill. I also know people who have entered this through starting out in architecture and then going into NIDA later. I did a media degree initially, and then went into NIDA. So it doesn't necessarily have to be about that. It's more about being creative and having articulate ideas. I think to stand out in your designs, I guess my advice would be that you want to look beyond just what is there on the page. You want to contribute to the world. So what I mean by that is not just creating like a backdrop of something that's just sort of already there that you can already get by reading the script.
Yeah.
You want to be adding to the, because if you think of it outside of the HSC kind of, or I mean any higher like education, it's more about they're involving you because you have an aesthetic and a perspective. So I think that's like the biggest thing.
The only thing I want to add is one of the things that I've really admired about your design work, and I've seen a lot of the shows you've designed for Griffin recently, is that the stage is not over full.
No, yeah.
Like sometimes I think people think I need to bring all of the fanciest chocolates out of the chocolate box, and it's just too much.
Yeah.
And I just love the refinement of a couple of really strong ideas.
Yes.
And executing them to a really high degree of polish, I think.
And I personally, this is my personal view, so it's like we have a whole wonderful access to things like streaming services, and so we are trying to create live theatre that's competing with that, and I think we're trying to create an experience that is unique. And so what I often think about is what the audience can bring. So what imagination can they bring to interject, and like for example with Constellations, I wasn't literally trying to tell the audience all the stuff that I told you. I was trying to create a sense of that, and so that they can walk away going, I wonder what that was.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, the play is made in the hearts and minds of the audience.
Totally.
And you're just giving them the physical environment in which to dream.
Yeah.
What else, Joyce?
So thank you so much both for answering. Kind of going back to set design specifically for high school students, one of the questions that we often get is where can they find more resources relating to set design or staging a play specifically?
Yeah.
So any recommendations, please?
One, there's a plug for Stephen Curtis.
Yeah.
Still the head of design?
No,
Recently was the head of design at the NIDA, the National Institute of Dramatic Art. It's a really good book.
Yeah.
Staging ideas, set and costume design for theatre. And we've got an excerpt, about 20-odd pages from this book that we'll put with the Learning Resources pack. And it's super practical. What I love about it is exactly what you brought to tonight, is that mix of being really practical, just what's there in the script, make a careful breakdown.
Yeah.
What are the affordances, the constraints and the possibilities of this particular theatre space, and then the imaginative work.
Yeah.
What's this play suggesting to me?
Totally.
What could the world of this play be?
Yeah.
So that's really good. But then and the resources that Isabel listed for image searching, they'll be available to you via the PowerPoint.
And you also have a PDF pack of resources that you've both put together that we'll be sending out to everyone. Thank you. We've got a question from Mark. Is there any other advice, comments that you shared about this earlier in the process that helps students to get started?
To get started. Is that Mark in Bega?
It is.
Wonderful drama teacher, Mark in Bega. We talked about that, getting started, like the very first sparks. And you said for you it was the Post-it notes.
Yeah.
Almost.
And the other exercise I have is I try to often think of, I have like a few exercises that I always tap into when I don't have a particular strong idea immediately. And I really am a strong believer that you have to do to find the idea. So I don't really often sit there and like go, this is the idea. It's always through the act of drawing, always through the act of like, or doing a breakdown, or through just building the model box. I think that's a really other great place to start when you don't have an idea. And what I mean by that, the model box of the venue. So you're starting to understand the space and have thoughts about that. And then I think that invites you, just like a blank piece of paper, the idea of play, because you can just like put a little figure in there, put a tissue, or put a big cup, or put things that you can just find. Or
It's a bit like when you were kids with
Totally.
plasticine.
Yeah, it's
and
play.
you would start sort of moulding
Yeah.
something. You don't
Yeah.
know what it's going to become.
Totally.
And then, okay, it is a
And I think that's
cup. It is a tree.
Especially if your language isn't, your communication style isn't drawing, that's the way to kind of like visually represent your ideas. You could use popsicle sticks, like just really basic, pieces of cardboard that are made from cereal boxes that you chop up and masking tape together, like anything that can create shape with a scale ruler and a little human figure, and you'll start to create images.
Yeah.
Things you print out, like you could print out trees in a forest, that's the way you can accumulate images.
I know for me, when I've been supervising students, Belvoir Street upstairs is a space that I know very well.
Yes.
I've had the good fortune of being able to perform on that stage a couple of times. And so making a model of just that space
Yes.
without a set design in it, just the so-called empty space.
Yes.
It's really great.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. I think
that,
hopefully that helps, Mark.
Excellent. Thank you so much for both. I've got 2 more questions. So one of them is for those students that not necessarily live in metropolitan areas like Sydney or Melbourne, what are some ways that they can access, shows, floor plans, just to have a look at the bigger theatres that would help them with set design?
There is actually a lot of theatre also filmed. I'm trying to think of the Australian.
It's called Australian Plays Online
Australian
or
Plays
something.
Online,
Yeah,
and then there's also the National Theatre. They do a lot of live.
From London,
Yeah, and I have a feeling some are on SBS as well.
Yeah.
So I think if you're just looking for filmed plays, I think also you will find a lot on. I've seen just a lot of trailers and little cut videos on YouTube. I think also there's a lot of images of set designs on Pinterest as well, but they're just photographs. And then I think the other, most venues, as we said before, just on their websites of different venues will have access to their tech specs and drawings. If not, they tend to have a contact detail of like a coordinator who will most likely send you a PDF drawing.
You could go to the local council,
Yeah.
I think, and find out who manages venues
Yeah.
and start there. Your teacher could help you. I would just want to stress that if you're living in regional New South Wales, don't feel that you have to come up with your hypothetical design that's going to sit on the stage at the Drama Theatre of the Opera House or Belvoir Street Theatre. There's some fantastic theatre spaces in regional towns, Orange, Bathurst, all over the place. So if it's a space that you actually physically can get to and sit in, that would be amazing. There is also Belvoir Street Theatre, and this will be in the pack of learning resources that we'll put up online. Belvoir Street Theatre has this quite cool virtual tour that you can do.
Yeah, that's
a
awesome.
3D virtual tour. It's quite good fun. So you can actually get some sort of sense of what it would be like to work in their theatres.
Okay. I know I said 2 more, but we actually just one came through and I want us to address it. With the costume design, major work that students have to complete as part of this project, how would you choose which scenes to make a costume for?
I would choose which scenes. I think, again, I would choose something that would, excite me the most and provide the biggest design offering. So what I mean by that is some plays are written in a very, like Constellations, in a very contemporary space. And even though the costumes are really painstakingly chosen, they're not kind of really flexing a lot of my creativity skills, They have a very, a certain angle, which is very character-driven, very natural. And I think you want to choose something that maybe has a bit more design concept around it. And by that I mean something that has something that you can talk about that's connected to the play, in terms of the thesis of your design, whether it's a period play and then you're only stripping out all the colour, or and that's connected to something in the play or something. I think that's what I would do. And something that also, this is the other thing, if something happens in the play where the costume changes, I think that's also really important. That's written about in the play. I think that's, and And I think also, and then if you choose a play that has none of that, I think choosing something where it feels like at the climax of the play. And I think you will know that naturally by reading the play. Yeah.
I think you should go to Isabel Hudson's website. There's some fantastic, like you've done, and even there's Mr. Burns. You did some beautiful costume designs for Mr. Burns. And I love what on your website also. I noticed that you don't just have production photographs. You've often got some examples of early sketches and things, which is great.
Yeah.
Excellent. Last one so far, at least. Paul, this is more of a question for you specifically. Obviously, we've spoken about costume design, we've spoken about set design, a little bit about directing as well. Yeah. What are some subjects that you do teach here at the university that relate to these topics?
I just finished teaching a unit called Production Strategies for Performance, and so that covered aspects of lighting design and sound design for performance, and then the technical part of, operating lights and sound. It's not vocational level training, but it's sensitising people, giving them an awareness. Most people who would go to NIDA would come through having done an arts degree somewhere. So theatre and performance studies you can do as a major, as part of an arts degree. We have a lot of interactions with artists in residence like Isabel, other members, Griffin Theatre and so forth. And so students get to observe the process of making theatre by professionals. They get to do workshops with professionals on theatre making as well, devising processes. Yeah.
And you actually have a theatre on campus.
We've got a studio. Yeah, we don't put on full-scale productions, but we do little kind of production exercise, short devised pieces and that kind of thing.
Perfect.
Fun. It's good.
Thank you so much. That's the last of the questions that has come through. But if you have any more, please feel free to email us at fast.partnerships@sydney.edu.au, and I'll pass it on to Paul and I'll get back to you.
Thank you, Isabel, so much. It's a pleasure. We'll continue the conversation after the cameras have stopped rolling. But Joyce, I think you're just going to give us a bit of housekeeping you need to do at the end.
Thank you everyone for your questions. Very much appreciated. If you wanted to stay up to date with any upcoming opportunities and events, you can also sign up to our Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences Participate High School newsletter, and this is where we advertise more topics and also expressions of interest for topics in 2025. Thank you so much for joining. Greatly appreciate it, and we hope to see you again very, very soon. Best of luck with your assessments.